As we enter the new decade, it's always fun to look back at the past and anticipate the future. With the 2010s finally coming to an end, it's interesting to note how cyclical fashion can be and how many trends came back during the last half of the decade. I'm mostly talking about the revival of Y2K and McBling. With the sudden resurgence of these two aesthetics and how closely in time they happen from one another, it's easy to get them confused and merge them together, but I'm here to finally set the record straight. Y2K and McBling are not the same, and I'm here to talk about how they're separate from one another and how they came to be. The Y2K aesthetic got its name from the computer bug of the same name. It reached its height in the years 1997 to 2001 and encompasses many aspects of life like fashion, music, and furniture. It was an era that really encapsulated technology and all things futuristic, and also injected people with an optimism about the upcoming millennium. The art at this time was a mixture of 2D and 3D. And with the new technology that was available, dreaming up improbable dreamscapes and coming up with an idea of what the future could look like became incredibly fun. The color palette included, but was not limited to, chrome, icy blue, green, white, black, and orange. But what caused the rise of this aesthetic in pop culture? Well, let's talk about it. Tracing back the origins of an aesthetic is never easy just because there's so much overlap going on. However, the Y2K Institute is a really good resource that really helped me out, and if you guys want to see some archive pictures, that's the place to find them. But if we're going to talk about origins, we're going to have to go way back to the Y2K bug. As the new millennium approached, many computer programmers around the world began to realize that there was a huge flaw in the way computer programs were written. When computers were first being made, computer engineers used a 2-digit code for writing years instead of 4 digits. So if the year was 1979, it was shortened to 79. This saved them money and space at the time. But as the year 2000 approached, they realized that the computer might interpret 00 as 1900 and not 2000. This was a huge problem that they thought would affect all businesses such as banks, insurance companies, transportation, and even nuclear power plants. So it's a big problem. Even devices that contain computer chips like elevators and medical equipment were thought to be at risk. Some countries like the US spent $300 billion upgrading and replacing computers around the country in the years leading up to the new millennium. There was a lot of hysteria and misinformation being spread, and they even had guides and books on how to deal with the problem. Some people went as far as stocking up on food and water before they rang in the new year. And then the millennium came and went, and everyone's computers were fine, bringing an anticlimactic end to the frenzy that was the Y2K bug. However, this did lead to a lot of people claiming it was a hoax by the government, but that's pretty much where the name Y2K came from. There was a lot of anxiety about the future and what it might look like, but there was also this excitement as well. With the rapid technological changes in the 90s, we got a lot more art and media that was technologically based. The first time we truly saw a lot of this aesthetic was around 1995 to 1997. The design and fashion of this period was very distinctive and very much of its era. One thing about Y2K is that the style is so easily recognizable. One way you can see this distinction is through the clothes that people wore. Now, there were many different aesthetics going on in the 90s, so this is not reflective of how the majority of people dressed. This is just a look at the popular trends and fashions that were a part of Y2K culture. So to start off with, sunglasses were a big fashion statement during the 90s. Throughout the decade, sunglasses definitely changed shape and style according to popular movies, fashion shows, or celebrities that made them fashionable. Towards the mid to late 90s, during the height of Y2K, brands like Oakley were making glasses smaller, more colorful, and futuristic. Everyone from Alia to Brad Pitt were wearing these types of glasses. And who could forget the GO himself, Dennis Rodman. This is kind of an offset of existing fashion trends in the 90s, Baggier clothing was a staple in this decade, and wearing cargo pants was another facet of this trend. Also making this more utilitarian and more functional fits into the futuristic element of the Y2K aesthetic. So platform shoes of every kind were on trend in the 90s, but for this particular aesthetic, patent leather platform boots were definitely a must-have. Probably inspired by the costume design in the movie The Matrix, leather, pleather, and latex were popular materials to make clothes, shoes, and handbags out of. Leather bodysuits were popular in music videos like Britney Spears' Oops, I Did It Again and Missy Elliott's The Rain. Metallic makeup and accessories were popular in this area. It definitely gave even ordinary things a more otherworldly and futuristic look to them. High fashion definitely took inspiration from all the technological changes that were happening at the time. A staple is John Galliano's Christian Dior show inspired by The Matrix. With a total of 43 looks, the first half of the looks were very reminiscent of the movie, featuring the leather and utilitarian-inspired accents. And who could forget Alexander McQueen's Givenchy Fall 1999 show, which had cybernetic prints, metallics, and translucent pieces. One of the things that makes the Y2K era so interesting is that it really affected the world outside of clothing and vice versa. Furniture, technology, and architecture had its own very unique look that was specific to this futuristic aesthetic. So blobitexture was pretty much this unique style of design where they made things like buildings more curved or rounded, very blob kind of looking. This is a departure from harsh corners and lines, and the uncommon shapes made things appear more revolutionary at the time. And this wasn't limited to buildings at all. In fact, one of the things that made this style take off was actually Apple. Before they made the iMac G3, most computers were drab and beige looking. At this point, Microsoft was winning the computer game by focusing on putting Windows on every computer. So when the iMac G3 came out, it was considered very childlike at first. Eventually, though, people resonated with the design and it became a major hit for the company. So you really saw blobs on everything from buildings, computers, and furniture. There were so many artists trying new things at this time, and a lot of them actually fit into the Y2K aesthetic. One of the ways artists did this was through music videos. So everyone from Aaliyah, Britney Spears, and TLC were doing Y2K inspired music videos. One of the pioneers and most influential people that inspired this change was Hype Williams. He's an amazing director who did videos for Janet Jackson, Busta Rhymes, and Missy Elliott. His use of fisheye perspective helped define the style, along with the futuristic set designs and the synthetic clothing that were metallic or latex looking. Other notable directors that encompass this style and made some of your favorite music videos are Mark Romanek, Chris Cunningham, Joseph Kahn, and David Myers. Movies became another way of exploring the capabilities of the internet and the fascination of the future of it. But the film that really drove this aesthetic into gear was The Matrix. If you don't know, it's a science fiction drama about a dystopian future where humans are trapped in a simulated reality so that aliens can feast on their energy source. This movie really revolutionized film, grossing over $460 million worldwide and winning 4 Academy Awards. It was highly praised for its cinematography, action sequences, costume design, and is considered one of the best science fiction movies of all time. Their wire work was copied in everything from Charlie's Angels to X-Men, and the use of slow motion and spinning cameras inspired many films after it. More movies that were released that embodied this aesthetic were mostly futuristic or campy in tone, looking at it retrospectively. Xenon Girl of the 21st Century, Zoolander, and Spy Kids are some more that come to mind. They embody this futuristic tone, take risks, and make great technological leaps with their storytelling. And most of all, their version of the future is so much fun. What caused the eventual decline of the Y2K aesthetic? Well, honestly, it was for a number of reasons. One of the biggest things that contributed to the fall of Y2K was the burst of the dot-com bubble. The internet changed almost every aspect of our lives, and it also changed how businesses evolved. During the late 90s, the internet inspired a lot of people to start businesses online, and investors just assumed that if a business was online, it would be a huge moneymaker. When in fact, most of these companies were overvalued and made little to no profit at all, and eventually the market crashed. This was a huge loss for people at the time, and it didn't stop there either. There was the election, 9/11, anthrax scares, the Iraq war. All of this culminated in the ending of the optimism people had for the future. The shift in culture was more luxury-oriented and nihilistic, which eventually led to the rise of the McBling aesthetic. That was the final nail in the coffin for Y2K. With fashion trends being cyclical, it was only a matter of time before we saw this dead aesthetic rise back into the fold. Some people say that there's been a resurgence of the Y2K aesthetic, but I'm not one of those people. Well, not completely anyways. Do I think some elements of the aesthetic have been taken and co-opted here and there? Absolutely. But I think most people are referring to the McBling aesthetic instead of Y2K. I believe that Y2K was a product of its time. With how fast technology was rapidly changing in front of everyone's eyes and the looming millennium, I think it makes complete sense that people were excited for the future. I think what makes Y2K so distinctive is partly because of nostalgia. Looking back at everything back then, everything seems so much simpler and more fun, mostly because we were younger. And the technology changed so rapidly that there wasn't much time to simply stay in that place for very long. And with how the internet has improved, it's so much easier for everyone to tell millions of people how much better their childhood was than what's happening now. Regardless, I think Y2K has a special place in my heart because you can feel the creativity and the optimism in its art form. It's wild and alien and colorful and very youthful. I definitely think it's something that will be revisited even in years to come. Thank you for watching, and watch out for part 2 where I'll be explaining the McBling aesthetic.